Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Dr. Charles Garfield did some extensive research to find out what are the key characteristics of high-level performers. What he found was that we all have glimpses of high-level performance. The key is to know what these high-level performance characteristics are so that when we have a glimpse, we can catch on to it and keep it. But the first thing I'd like to open with is a little Sufi story. In the Sufi philosophy, they give the moral of the story up front. This lady was asked to speak to a group, and she said, you only learn and act upon what you already know. That's the moral of the story. And tonight, I want you to think you're only going to learn and act upon what you already know. Oh, by the way, when she went to deliver that presentation, she said to the group, you only learn and act upon what you already know. Do you know what I'm going to talk to you about tonight? They said, no. Well, in that case, there's no point in me staying, and she left. They invited her back again. And she said, remember, you only learn and act upon what you already know. Do you know what I'm going to talk about tonight? They all said, yes. Well, in that case, there's no point in me staying, and she left again. They brought her back the third time, and this time they were ready. And when she asked the question, half of them said yes, and half of them said no. She very simply said, with the side that said yes, teach the side that said no. And that's the essential element of Toastmasters. That we work together. And that we all have ideas. And so tonight, when I'm doing this presentation, you may have an aha. And if you ever have an aha, just an epiphany, this is yes. Put your hand in. And if you have an aha is only as good as the action you take. So if you have an epiphany in my presentation, just say, oh, I can use that. You write it down. And in Sartori's book, Synchronicity, the Entrepreneurial Edge, she said, if you have an inspirational idea, take 5 minutes to mind map it and take some action within 24 hours. Now, what are the characteristics of high-level performers? Well, there's quite a few of them, but tonight I want to cover 3. I want to cover the first one, which is foresight. I want to cover the high tolerance for chaos and ambiguity, or being in the flow. And I want to conclude with the key characteristic: high-level performers are prepared to take risks. And when we're talking about foresight and the ability to carry out long-range planning, that means you have a picture of your preferred future. And then you pull towards the picture. Yesterday, Brazil defeated, Brazil got defeated by Germany, 7-1. Why was that? Brazil's one of the top teams in the world. 14 years ago, the German Football Association said, we need to have a plan if we're going to win the World Cup. They put that plan into place and throttled Brazil 7-1 because they had a vision and a plan. Foresight and the ability to carry out long-range planning is an absolutely essential element for a high-level performer. We can all do it in tiny little things, like seeing when our next speech is going to be, seeing how far out we're going to go in our speeches, see that I have all my speeches before I go back to my hometown in India, so that when I join my club back there, by the way, that was endpoint visualization, when I looked up to find out that there is a club in your hometown. But think about that. Did anybody notice that Canada had a tennis player in the finals of Wimbledon? Did you notice that? Guess what? That was foresight and the ability to carry out long-range planning. It came out later that the Canadian Tennis Federation had put a plan together to make sure that we had people. Oh, we also had a player win the doubles, men's. That all came from somebody putting a plan together. Individuals can put their own plans together. Associations and countries and clubs can put their plans together. But foresight and the ability to carry out long-range planning is a key element. A few years ago, I was asked to work with a young hockey player, Robbie Tallis. And he was playing hockey for the Seattle Thunderbirds. It's a junior hockey team, 20 and under. He hadn't been drafted, which meant that nobody knew who he was to go to the NHL. So I said to him, I said, where do you want to be? He said, I want to be in the NHL. I said, Robbie, no, where do you want to be? He said, no, the NHL. And I stayed on it until finally he said, okay, I want to be in Boston. I said, let's get a picture of you being in Boston. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, we get a picture of the Boston team, cut out the head of one of the goalies and put your head in there. And then you picture that every night and see yourself playing in Boston. And every time you're out practicing, picture that you're making he's a goalie. Picture you're making the save and you're passing it out to Ray Bourque. Run those movies every day. At the same time, you have to take action. What can I do? Oh, start writing letters. And again, this was a little bit before sending spam emails. Send a letter to Boston. Say, I'm going to be there to be your goalie. I'm going to be there to be your goalie. And he kept sending letters. One day, they're sitting there, and they go, we're going to have 4 teams in this rookie camp. We've only got 3 goalies. Does anybody remember those letters we keep getting from this kid from Seattle or Vancouver or wherever he's from? So they pulled it out of the garbage. They gave him a call, and they said, Robbie, can you make it? Well, he could, except he didn't have any money. His parents didn't have any money. His manager found out about it and said, there's your ticket, Robbie. One way, first class. You better make the team. He said to me, he said, Vic, he said, when they were handing out the shirts, and they handed out the shirts to the top people, the top draft people, 1, 2, 3, 4. He said, by the time they got to me, they were almost down to triple digits. Well, they were just about out of shirts. Anyway, he made Boston. Played 2 years in Boston, played 2 years in Chicago. And that was a kid that wasn't going anywhere. But he had a picture and he took action. The key element is foresight and the ability to carry out long-range planning. One of the other interesting characteristics of a high-level performer is they have a high tolerance for chaos and ambiguity. That means when things don't go right, they have a mechanism for controlling that. They can handle chaos and ambiguity. They can get in the flow. I remember when I had a 18 and under boys volleyball team. I had one guy on the team, anytime he'd make a mistake, he'd be ripping the net down. He just, went into massive self-recrimination. Until I taught him the simple rule. You make a mistake, you stand tall. You breathe deeply in through your nose. And you smile. The standing tall, by the way, is called the Matador Walk. They teach the Matadors from age 12 to stand tall. And what's the reason for that? It sends a message of courage to your body. If you're going to be a Matador, you're going to need courage. Breathing deeply in through the nose. Believe it or not, there's nitrous oxide cells in your nostrils. When you breathe in through your nose, this nitrous oxide cell slough off and give you a euphoric feeling. And the research is clear that if you smile It resets the brain. Now there's one more thing that I teach them to do, is you do a retroactive visualization. That means that you think of the disaster and then you run the movie again, seeing it come out the way you want it to come out. And I remember saying to one of my players to do that, and he said, well, that makes it a lot easier to smile. Do that. Stand tall, breathe deeply, smile, and do a retroactive visualization. Now, you may think that that comes from a sport background. No, that came from a business book. You want to be able to do that. You're in a tough situation in the office. You have a disastrous day. Stand tall, breathe deeply, and smile. The final characteristic of high-level performers is they are willing to take risks. They're willing to take chances. And one of the things that they ask themselves one or the other of these two questions. The first question you might ask is, what's the worst thing that could happen? And am I prepared to accept the result? What's the worst thing that could happen? And am I prepared to accept the result? The second one is, they might say, well, how significant is this in the entire scheme of the universe? So you ask either one of those, it's pretty easy. I was using that with one of my clients this morning regarding a risk that he's about to take. But I remember I did a lot of talking and I talked about this subject, but when I was with the government of British Columbia, it was one of my responsibilities was to give grants to the various sport governing bodies. And one of those sport governing bodies was parachute jumping. So after we'd allocated the money, I said, could I come out and watch your BC Parachute Jumping Championship? They said, Vic, we'll do one better. You can jump. I said, I can jump? Then I went over and I said, now, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? And am I prepared to accept that result? How significant is that in the entire scheme of the universe? Okay, there I am, taking my training in the morning and jumping in the afternoon. A couple of interesting things about parachute jumping. All they teach you is what happens if anything goes wrong. So it's not a real enthusiastic day of training. But I noticed one thing. As I am going into the plane, I'm the last person in. I figured out the psychology of this female jump master. She was able then, because that means I'm first one out, she was able then to say to all the young people, hey, look, the gray-haired guy went, so it's no problem. So there I am, kneeling down on the edge of the plane. And there's a door there. Well, they don't use doors in parachute jumping planes. They took the doors off a long time ago. Well, I'm looking out there and I'm a little afraid of heights, so this is not too good. And then the jump master said, well, we're going to tilt the plane so you can see the jump zone. I said, could you tilt it that way? And I can see out there. So they tilted it that way. And finally, it was my turn to jump. And I am sitting there with my feet waving, and I'm hanging on for dear life. And finally she says, you're gone. And out I go. And that's when I found out. The reason we take risks is we get an endorphin release, which in Fox's book, The Biology of Optimism, he says is critical for the survival of the species. An endorphin release. But what's most interesting was I thought about it after. There I am sitting on the edge of the plane. And I'm afraid of falling out. My entire objective was to jump. And I've got 2 parachutes on. Why would I be afraid to fall out? Now, some of you have heard